Hello and welcome to another video. So today we're taking a look at a budget sword build. If you watched yesterday's video, you knew this was going to be coming up, but this budget sword build of course has 0 legendaries, which is what makes it reasonably budget, and very few golds. I mean, well, I can't say very few, I mean there's still quite a few golds. Considering the deck though, most of these golds are pretty standard, and if you don't have most of them, it's a little weird, as most people would normally have Staircase and Seraphic Blade and Chromatic Duels, especially if you're playing Sword, so those are normally pretty stock standard. The only ones you may not have are stuff like Fall from Grace, which in the current meta you'd be weird for not having, and Apostle of Usurping and Strugner. Apostle's the new one, and Strugner of course is not super common, but overall this is definitely worthwhile deck to give a go. It's cheap with no legendaries, so that's always good. It runs a pretty nice tight engine, so you can quite easily copy out gilded stuff all the time with Apostle Usurping, taking full advantage of those and really just pumping the board full. You can go for extra evos using this new 4-drop, which is great fun. I was actually having a lot of fun using that, and overall just quite a nice deck. So we're going to get right into it and check it out. So this deck always tends to go one of two ways. It'll either be drawn out and quite weak, or it'll go pretty early and be quite strong. That doesn't mean it can't compete in the long game, but it definitely falls off and becomes more difficult to win in the long game, as you'll see in our next matchup, which I'm actually excited to go through. But for this one, we are playing against Forest, which is one of the weaker crafts at the moment in Shadowverse. It's definitely lacking when it comes to big kind of cards to really take full utilization of. It does have 1 or 2 solid decks, I think, but even those are still definitely bottom of the barrel when it comes to competitive decks and strong ladder decks, so I definitely wouldn't run those myself. Well, Forest player obviously starting off pretty solid here. We started off pretty well ourselves, but at least we're able to bait some of the stuff they are playing out. So we're looking for a decent turn 3 play, going for a pretty nice card. I mean, the ambush one's pretty good. Definitely gives you a good loot card option to generate some, as I believe it's whenever this card attacks, so you don't even have to clash for it to go off. And we get a pretty nice frontline Cavalier play, being able to clean up a lot of this board. I decided to go face, not really worried about the 1/1s. We get our loot card, so Gilded Boots, we'll take advantage of that later on. Especially with Apostle. Apostle's definitely the one you want to take advantage of the loot cards most. So this worked out pretty well. We got to keep our 1/2s up. We've got a pretty consistent board state here, with our opponent only really having 1/1s, and Servant of Usurpation actually counters 1-drops pretty well, as it can't be killed by anything with 1 attack because it will just pretty much clash up. Of course, that excludes Bane effects and such, but just straight up 1 attack followers like fairies pretty much get eaten alive. So wiping out the board, keeping our gilded cards, or loot cards, which I think is a much better name.
Will you be good to me?
An Airbound Barrage, that's a pretty good way to deal with the 4-3, but obviously our opponent decides, say, I can't keep up with this, and I'm going to concede fairly early. So that was a relatively quick game, honestly. Of course, our opponent conceding early definitely helped us out, but we pretty much had secured board by that point, and there wasn't much chance the Forest player was going to make a huge comeback off it, as we were just going to keep putting pressure down with our current hand. So I really couldn't have seen many ways for them to at least return play. Not that it would have been impossible, just unlikely. This match, however, while I'll give you the heads up, I do end up losing this match. It is extremely intense. This is a Omen portal deck, so no surprise there. But the fact that this deck runs so many counters to amulets in particular, especially Omen, is nuts. So if for some reason Puppet Omen and stuff becomes super popular, this deck does a very nice job at countering normally. It's just in this case, I ran out of resources too soon. But it did make for an extremely long game. I was actually worried we were going to get to draw for the finisher, but unfortunately we didn't quite make it there. So the start of the game is pretty normal though. I mean, our opponent's really just pumping out puppets and dealing with my board pretty consistently, which is to be expected when you're playing against a portal player. I definitely probably should have went for All Holy in this match. Definitely something I'll keep in mind next time, as Fatal Spellbomb just isn't as good advantage to have. So if you're ever going to use an Evo point, Frontline Cavalier is usually your #1 go-to. Of course, the new 4-drop is also quite decent because it does give you that free Evo card.
Right.
We do get to see Omen of Destruction. Not a shocker there. So I do make, I believe, a small misplay here, and I try to Fatal Spell Bomb the 3-2. For some reason I thought the Fatal was actually a Banish, but it's Destruction. Completely blanked on that. Not that it was too big an issue. As, I mean, they're going to have to trade it off anyway at this point. So I decided to just remove it. And we got our Evo card, which practically gives us 4 Evos at this point. It does cost 2 player points, but I think that's a worthwhile trade-off for an extra Evo. So Autonomous Knight looking to really trade, again, building up a lot of puppets. There's one thing you see in this match quite consistently is that they honestly have nearly unlimited puppet generation at this point. So I decided to go for the Vals, going for the Holy Pure Bomb. It definitely should have went for 2 Holy Pure Bombs there instead of going for this Fatal Spell Bomb. Looking back on the match is definitely see that I would have had a better time if I had went for those instead, as I would have been able to deal with a lot of the future Omen stuff later on. I just wasn't expecting this match to be as full on as it was when it comes to how many puppets this guy could generate and how many of the Omen cards he could actually pull off. So we're not too worried about dealing with the puppets, they're going to die regardless. Fatal, give them the free draw is fine, and set up a staircase, as if they have to clear these quick flaters, we're going to get a couple of buffs on it anyway. So we do have the Fall from Grace and the Holy Pure Bomb, so we've got plenty of ways to deal with the future Omen cards.
Should have been quicker.
Destruction in white and Destruction in black are really the only trouble cards here. White isn't even a trouble card, it's just kind of a pain. It's black that's going to be the real finisher for them.
This one's for you.
So at this point in the game I was a little worried. They started duplicating their whites, which means they're going to end up with more blacks overall.
Even your bones will burn.
So it's definitely something I had to keep in mind. And I decided to go for the Holy Pure Bomb. So that was probably honestly a mistake, but I thought, hey, if I'm going to try, I'm going to stop them from healing, and this will stop them from just purely playing black on that turn. So it was definitely a kind of biased time mechanic I was going for there. Unfortunately, that doesn't end up working out, but we keep it pretty consistent with these cards. So Gilded Boots works really nicely there, being able to both generate more cards and give this guy a little buff. And now I just made it a little hard for his puppets to try and even attempt to clear this. So there is the Destruction in black. Pretty predictable, honestly, on that play. Especially since we are going to go for the Fall from Grace. And as you can see, generating even more loot cards.
I applaud you.
And we've activated our staircase now, so we're actually going to have a decent draw. But this is definitely going into the long game, and considering they have 2 Destruction in blacks, I definitely have to deal with those. So the draw wasn't bad, and now we can use Apostle of Usurpation to kind of finish our opponent's board here, as we have plenty of gilded cards to use.
Your fate's been set.
And I kind of just try to put a little bit of pressure down. Trying to force out some more players. Of course they are just going to kill it with a puppet, but I felt like that was the better play to do. Now, unfortunately, puppet strings, again, unlimited puppet generation at this point is pretty nuts. I mean, of course there is a finite amount of puppets, but it's, at this point, practically limitless. There is only, I think, 1 true unlimited puppet generation card, and that would probably be the Teddy Bear, because you can, of course, give it to your opponent and it'll just constantly generate puppets. And I suppose Flower Doll also will constantly generate puppets as long as your hand size is low enough. So we get a chance to get rid of black, which is exactly what we were saving it for, but now we're in a really tight spot as we're pretty much onto a top decking area, as we don't have too many big options, and if they manage to duplicate white again, we're not going to really be able to deal with that without drawing into one of our other cards that can deal with the amulets, and the odds of that, unfortunately, when top decking is reasonably low, as we don't have a big draw card for Sword here. It's the only big letdown to this deck when you get dragged into the late game.
I'll show you why I am fit to rule.
So I went for the loot cards, is really what I was aiming for here.
this was foreseen.
So went for Goblet, a little bit of a buff, just stop it from being banished by a potential substitution that they may have. Fortunately, Destructive Reframe, that's exactly what they went for. And another Puppet Room, so definitely a problem. Get the Seraphic Blade. Since it's not a banishment card and just a destroy card, it was useless to use on Destruction in white or Destruction in black, which is the only reason I didn't actually hold on to it. If it was a banishment, it would be much better.
I want, therefore I take.
So, Disciple of Usurpation with its ambush is still fairly decent. It's going to at least give us a chance here. And now they're just playing puppets, I think, to free up hand size, as they don't really have any way to really do that otherwise. So it was definitely a long game. As you can see, this game was quite drawn out. It was really back and forward on what was going to happen. If I managed to get another way to deal with the destruction in black, we probably would have been able to win this game. So it was really just literally counting down the clock to see who would draw first. And the puppets, of course, were going to keep clearing me, so really all I could do was try and counter their board at the same time. Of course, since most of their cards are quite low attack stats, it's quite easy to deal with most of them. And being able to remove these flower dolls was quite important, as I didn't want them constantly regenerating. If they had have constantly regenerated flower dolls, we would have been in for a pretty rough time.
You're a thin fella.
A violation.
Which at this point, flower doll's going to be our biggest problem. Luckily, Apostle is pretty perfect, as it does deal with the flower doll nicely, and we end up with a Boots, which is actually fairly decent as well. So at this point I was like, okay, we've got a fairly decent board. If they don't play anything crazy, we should survive. And fortunately, their whole turn this turn was Entity, which is pretty perfect. It buys us another turn and gives us a chance. Unfortunately, I couldn't have been that lucky, as their Disciple of Destruction, not really the problem, but Apostle definitely is. Gives them an extra white and a chance to really take advantage. If they didn't have that reframe there though, we would have stood a decent chance.
Just don't get it.
So now we're really running out of options. They've definitely got another white in hand, of which they can just kind of play out, because it's already been buffed quite heavily. And now they have a black in hand, which means next turn, if they set that up and we don't draw a way to counter it, we lose the game. Chromatic Duel isn't going to be enough, unfortunately, so if we don't draw our Amulet Banish, we were going to lose. That was pretty much the situation I was left with at this point, as no real other way to deal with this.
Bow it down.
As soon as they play Destruction in black, it's game over at this point. And of course, their puppets, pretty much never ending. Just wiping most of my board out. The Destruction in black was definitely the roughest thing I had to deal with. And unfortunately, Knight's Way isn't what we want. So that pretty much gave them the game at this point. There was nothing else I could do, and it was a very intense and long game. All I was needing was a decent top deck. I had, I think, at least 2 more cards in this deck that would have gave us the chance to win, and unfortunately we just couldn't recover and get those cards back. So while it did end in a loss, that was a quite impressive last game, and it was the main reason I really wanted to show this deck off, as it was a lot of fun to play out. It was quite rough all the way through, of course. I was definitely in the top decking situation, but we definitely still had our 6-drop, which would have actually done amazing if we had drawn it. I'm pretty sure we would have had one... I don't think actually we would have had one more Valves, which was definitely rough, and we'd already used both Fall from Grace. So we did only have, I think, a 1 in 10-ish chance of drawing our 6-drop there to kind of win us the game, as after that I don't think our opponent could have recovered in time with only 4 or 5 cards in their deck. We would have been able to hopefully beat them and win pretty easily from there. It's just the unfortunate situation of not having that, so it was quite fun. I really enjoyed playing this budget deck. It's cheap enough that pretty much anyone can play, and it should do quite well for daily missions, and does pretty nicely on ladder overall. So if you did enjoy this video, hit the like button and subscribe. You'll find the deck list in the description below. Until next time, see ya.